Ever feel like you've lost something important? Your keys, your phone, maybe even your sense of direction in life? Well, today we're talking about the saint you've probably prayed to in those moments, even if you didn't know his full story. Get ready to dive into the incredible life of Saint Anthony of Padua, a man whose journey was anything but ordinary. He wasn't always known as Anthony of Padua. In fact, he wasn't even from Padua, and his name wasn't Anthony at birth. He was born in 1195 in Lisbon, Portugal, to a wealthy and noble family. His birth name was Fernando Martins de Bulhos. From a young age, Fernando was exceptionally bright and deeply religious. His family had big plans for him, envisioning a prestigious career, but Fernando felt a different calling. He was drawn to a life of simplicity and devotion. Against his family's wishes, at the age of 15, he joined the Augustinian canons at the monastery of St. Vincent on the outskirts of Lisbon. It was a respected religious order, but Fernando soon found that life there wasn't quite what he was looking for. Being so close to his hometown, he was constantly visited by friends and family, distracting him from his spiritual goals. He longed for more solitude and deeper study. So, after 2 years, he requested a transfer to the Monastery of the Holy Cross in Coimbra, which was then the capital of Portugal. This move was a big deal. He was essentially cutting ties with his old life to fully dedicate himself to God. In Coimbra, Fernando immersed himself in study. He spent the next 8 years poring over scripture and theology. He had a brilliant mind and a photographic memory, becoming one of the most learned scholars of his time. He was ordained a priest during this period, and it seemed his path was set. He would be a scholar, a priest, a quiet man of God within the monastery walls. But fate, or perhaps a higher power, had a dramatic plot twist in store for him. One day, the bodies of 5 Franciscan friars were brought to Coimbra. These friars had gone to Morocco to preach the Christian faith and had been martyred. Their story of courage and sacrifice spread like wildfire. As their remains were carried in procession to his monastery, Fernando was profoundly moved. He saw in these men a radical, simple, and heroic faith that he yearned for. He felt a burning desire to follow in their footsteps, not just to study the faith, but to live it out in the most daring way possible, even if it meant giving his own life. This was a turning point. Fernando knew he had to change course. He approached the small group of Franciscan friars living in a humble hermitage near Coimbra and shared his desire to join them. The Franciscans were a new, radical order founded by Saint Francis of Assisi. They lived lives of extreme poverty, simplicity, and service to the poor. It was a stark contrast to the more established, scholarly life of the Augustinians. To join them, Fernando had to leave everything behind once again. He gave up his name, Fernando, and took the name Anthony, in honor of Saint Anthony of the Desert, the patron of the hermitage where the Franciscans lived. It was a symbol of his complete transformation. Soon after, filled with zeal, Anthony set sail for Morocco, hoping to preach and, if it was God's will, to be martyred just like the 5 friars who had inspired him. But his mission didn't go as planned. Almost as soon as he arrived in Morocco, Anthony fell gravely ill. He was so sick that he couldn't preach or do any of the work he had set out to do. For months, he lay bedridden, a world away from home, his dreams of martyrdom seemingly dashed. Disheartened, he realized he had no choice but to return to Portugal to recover. So, he boarded a ship heading back home. But this journey would have another unexpected detour. A violent storm blew the ship completely off course. Instead of landing in Portugal, the ship was pushed eastward across the Mediterranean, eventually wrecking on the coast of Sicily, Italy. Anthony, still weak and sick, found himself a stranger in a strange land. But he wasn't alone for long. He heard that a great gathering of Franciscans, a general chapter, was being held in Assisi, the hometown of Saint Francis himself. With other local friars, he journeyed north on foot. Imagine this scene: thousands of friars gathered, living in simple huts, with Saint Francis in their midst. For Anthony, it was a dream come true. He finally met the man who had started the movement that had so captured his heart. At this massive gathering, however, Anthony was a complete unknown. He was a foreigner with a Portuguese accent, still recovering from illness. No one knew of his extensive education or his past as an Augustinian scholar. He was just another anonymous friar. When the meeting ended and friars were assigned to various posts, Anthony was overlooked. Finally, a provincial superior from northern Italy, feeling sorry for him, asked if he needed a place to go. Anthony humbly replied that he was happy to go anywhere, as long as he could have a cell to pray in and could celebrate Massachusetts. The superior sent him to a small, remote hermitage near the town of Forli. There, Anthony was assigned to the kitchen, washing pots and pans. He was perfectly content. He lived a hidden life of prayer and menial work, his great learning completely concealed. But you can't hide a light like his for long. The moment of revelation came during an ordination ceremony in Forli. A number of Franciscan and Dominican friars were present. The priest who was scheduled to give the sermon, or homily, fell ill at the last minute. The superior, in a bit of a panic, asked if any of the Dominicans, who were famous for their preaching, would step in. They all declined, saying they were unprepared. In desperation, the superior turned to his own Franciscan friars. No one volunteered. Then, he ordered Anthony to speak, thinking he could at least say a few simple words from the heart. Reluctantly, Anthony obeyed. He got up, and what happened next stunned everyone. He began to speak, not with simple words, but with a power, eloquence, and profound knowledge of the scriptures that left the entire room breathless. His voice was clear and strong, his arguments were brilliant, and his passion was infectious. The friars, who had only known him as a quiet dishwasher, were utterly astounded. It was as if a dam had burst, releasing a flood of wisdom and divine inspiration. Word of this hidden genius reached Saint Francis himself. Francis, who was initially wary of formal education for his friars, recognized the unique gift God had given Anthony. He gave Anthony his personal blessing to teach theology to the other friars, with one condition, that the spirit of prayer and devotion should not be extinguished by study. From that day on, Anthony's life of obscurity was over. He became a traveling preacher, journeying all over northern Italy and southern France. His sermons were legendary. Crowds numbering in the tens of thousands would gather to hear him. He had an incredible ability to make complex theological ideas simple and understandable for ordinary people. He spoke out fiercely against injustice, greed, and heresy, but always with a spirit of love and a call to conversion. He became known as the Hammer of Heretics because his knowledge of Scripture was so complete that he could easily and gently refute false teachings. But he was also known for his compassion. People flocked to him for confession, for guidance, and for healing. Countless miracles were attributed to his intercession, both during his life and after his death. This is where the famous tradition of Saint Anthony as the patron saint of lost things comes from. The story goes that a novice friar, who was growing tired of the religious life, decided to leave the community. On his way out, he stole Anthony's precious Psalter, a book of psalms that Anthony had personally annotated and used for teaching. For Anthony, this was a huge loss, like a professor losing his lecture notes. Anthony prayed earnestly that the book, and the novice, would be returned. Soon after, the novice not only returned the book but also returned to the Franciscan order. His heart changed. This story spread, and people began praying to Anthony whenever they lost something, trusting in his powerful intercession. After years of relentless travel and preaching, Anthony's health, which had been fragile since his time in Morocco, began to fail. He settled in the city of Padua, where he was deeply loved by the people. Even in his final years, he continued to preach, hear confessions, and work for justice, famously drafting a law to protect poor debtors from being imprisoned. In the spring of 1231, his strength gave out. Knowing his end was near, he asked to be taken to a small friary on the outskirts of Padua. On his way there, he died. He was only 36 years old. The news of his death brought immense grief to the people of Padua. Immediately, miracles began to be reported at his tomb. The demand for his canonization, to be officially recognized as a saint, was so overwhelming that the process was started right away. In an unprecedented move, Pope Gregory IX declared him a saint less than a year after his death. So, the next time you misplace something and find yourself saying a quick prayer to Saint Anthony, remember the incredible man behind the name. A noble-born scholar who chose poverty, a missionary whose plans were wrecked, a hidden genius discovered by accident. His life is a powerful reminder that our detours, our failures, and our hidden moments can often be the very things that lead us to our true calling. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the life of Saint Anthony. If you enjoyed this story and want to learn more about the fascinating lives of the saints, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, stay curious.